So, well, I mean, here we are. I mean, we're already at the 80s, right? I mean, we're at the 12. You've been there for a decade. And then when do you go to Chaps for your, uh, when you become part of that trio? What year is that you actually become Friday at Chaps?
Bobby Costello, who was a bartender and a so-called promoter at Chaps, happened to be at the 1270 he came up to me in, I don't know, 1981, 82.
Mm-hmm.
And said, why don't you come over to Chaps? I said, I already have a job here. I says, I love it here. He says, how much are they paying you? I says, it's none of your business. I said, I'll come over and talk, but I can't make any promises or anything like that. And I went over, and of course, it was, they made me a good offer, money-wise. I was quite surprised.
Mm-hmm.
And I says, okay, you're gonna tell so-and-so that I am gonna be taking over his Friday nights, correct? And they says, oh yeah, we'll let him know. Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I was on my way to, the 1270, was a Tuesday night, and I says, I know that David Pellegrino was playing Chaps on Tuesday nights as well as Friday nights. I says, I'm gonna go over there and see if management told him. So I pulled over. I couldn't find a parking space. I was practically on top of somebody's car because Huntington Avenue was such a thin street. And I walked over to the Deejay booth, and I'm looking around to see if any of the managers were there, and none of them were there. And David said, Carol, what are you doing? I says, well, I'm really here to give you some bad news. He says, what's that? He says, I says, they want me to play Friday nights here. He says, what, here? I says, yeah. I says, I knew they wouldn't tell you.
Mm-hmm.
I said, that's why I'm here. I want to make sure that you know that I'm going to be here this Friday night and you're not.
Yeah.
Okay, well, he went screaming out of the booth,
Yeah.
to find the managers. And I ran out of Chaps and got back to the car and went to the 1270.
Yeah.
And obviously it worked out fine.
Yeah. You were there
Because
that.
I was there,
Yeah.
and I remained there up until 1989.
Yeah.
No,
No.
95,
Yeah.
95, yeah.
So, can you tell me what year did you open the store?
1989, June 1989.
And you were already working at Chaps by then?
I was working at Chaps for quite a while,
Yeah.
and the 1270.
Yeah.
I gave up the 1270, and I gave up Saturday nights at the 1270
Oh, okay.
in 1989,
Oh,
and I stayed
okay.
with Chaps
Yeah.
because it was closer for me.
Right.
Okay.
And did you see the space for the record store and just start getting ideas about it? I mean, was that?
No, I was hesitant about it.
Yeah.
Because during that time, Anthony, I believe his name was Anthony Carbone, he worked for Atlantic Records in New York City. He got me a gig at 21 Hudson Street in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I can't turn this down. I got to get down there.
Mm.
So I take the Amtrak down to New York, and I got a chance to visit with Bobby Shaw from MCA. I got to visit with Curtis Urbina, the late Bobby Gosson. I went to visit so many people before I started working at this club that the Italian men ran in New York. And I went to visit Judy Weinstein, who I adore, even today, who has been through her own tragedies. And, you know, a lot of the record label people came down that night to hear me, because, I mean, it was a cab drive away, you know, and they were just handing me these test pressings of all these songs that I just couldn't believe, you know, and the next Thursday, I went down there with an empty suitcase because, you know, the same thing happened. I mean, I had so much vinyl that wasn't even pressed at the pressing plants yet that I wanted to play, you know, at the 1270 and Chaps. And, you know, Judy said, well, since you're down here, why don't you join my pool, my record pool? You know, I mean, you don't belong to any other pool. I says, no, I dropped out of the Boston record pool when I became a Billboard reporter. I mean, I'm a so-called honorary member. You know, you can give the records to somebody who really needs them, I told them at the Boston record pool. She says, well, why don't you come down to my pool? You're in New York more than you're in Boston. And I was really thinking about it because seeing the members that she had in her pool just blew me away. And the next step that I really wanted to do was learn more about mixing and producing and arranging. And I ran into Arthur Baker, and he says, Caril, you're welcome to come down to my studio. He says, but I can't pay you. I can teach you how to splice. I can teach you this, that, and the other thing, but, you know, I can't pay you. Well, I happen to have two male cousins. One lives in Manhattan, and one lives in Bay Ridge in Brooklyn. And, you know, I could have stayed with them and maybe found myself a part-time job doing who knows what. But what had happened is that my best friend, my girlfriend, put a gun in her mouth and shot herself to death.
The one that you went to Provincetown with all those years ago? Yeah.
So that changed everything. And I got on the phone and I called up Tita Gray in New York. And I says, Tita, can you fill in for me at 21 Hudson Street? I says, because so-and-so committed suicide. She says, well, I'll let them know. And she said, yeah. I says, thank you. And that changed my whole perspective and my whole life right there. And
how so?
Losing someone that I had no idea what the problem was.
Yeah.
And if I knew what the problem was, I would have helped her get through the problem.
Yeah.
And it just fucked my head up so much.
Yeah.
I ended up staying in Boston trying to understand this. And that's when she was buried, that's when I left the 1270 and just stayed at Chaps. And in June of 1989, Dana is the one that said, why don't you open up an import record store? I says, well, everybody goes to Jerry Warren's. He says, yeah, but yours can be a little bit different. Nothing is the same. You know, he only has one copy of this. He says, you know, he gave me ideas, etc. And, because when I used to go record shopping, I went down to Charlie's Vinyl Mania, Charlie Gropoli in New York, and bought records. And then I remember Dennis Walken, I think his last name was, opened up Decadence. And I don't know, I ended up owning a record store.
Did it surprise you that it went on as long as it did?
It sure did,
Yeah.
because I was not made out for retail.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
It's hard.
And yeah, it really was hard.
Yeah. But you
I
had-
was more of I was on the creative side
Yeah.
of the music business, not the retail side.
Right.
And I probably pissed off a lot of people. But what pissed me off was that there were people that I've known for years and have respected as DJs and still do, and as friends who expected me to owe them. And it's like, no.
You're running a business.
I'm running a business. My business does not pay its
Yeah.
bills by hallelujahs.
Right. But it put you in an interesting position because you became very influential in some respects, because of what got played in the city, because you would get to play things on Fridays at Chaps, and you would have a whole bunch of copies on Saturday morning. When you opened the store on Saturday, you'd sell out of all those copies of
Right.
something because you essentially broke the record on a Friday at Chaps, right? Or some
Thank
version
you.
of that, right? I mean, you.
Well, what I would do was that I would go into, I would come in the back door of the Vinyl Connection, my record
Yeah.
store, and just pull things that I heard during the week that was beginning to sell.
Yeah.
And bring them into Chaps, lock the back door, lock the front door, walk next door to Chaps, and play those records and watch the crowd's response to them.
Yeah, and that would tell you whether or not to order more
Right.
sometimes. Now, you had a lot of contacts in Europe or distributors in Europe or over the time of working for the pools and working as a billboard reporter. Has that helped you make those connections?
There was a man, Dave German, who used to work for Arista Records. He was a promotional guy. He gave me all the connections that I needed in America
Mhm.
to get in touch with people.
Mhm.
I owe him,
David German?
yeah.
Yeah. So interesting because you did a lot of imports, and of course we all loved the sound because the vinyl quality was better, right? The pressings
they
were
had-
generally better.
They used virgin vinyl
Yeah.
in the pressing plants in
Right.
Europe, yeah.
But dance music had moved over to Europe to a large degree by then. And a lot of the interesting stuff was coming out of Europe by then, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there was still some domestic releases, obviously, but house
Right.
music was taking over domestically, at least it seems, right? There was a lot
Right.
of house music coming out of domestic labels, and Europe was still doing a lot of high energy and doing a lot of.
Well, you have to remember that most of the, how can I say this? Growing up in Europe, you surrounded by classical music and opera, which, especially in Italy, where you were taught at a very early age to appreciate pretty music, which high energy was always a prettier sound,
Right.
let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very different from the R&B sound that you grew up on, though, right? But you liked it. You grew to like it, though, quite a bit, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was a Motown fanatic.
Right.
I was an American Bandstand kid in the 4th grade
Right.
that, had a club that, a girl club that would run home from school
Yeah.
and, have to watch every
Right.
second of American Bandstand.
Right.
And, during the Motown era, we try to learn the movements of the Temptations and the Four Tops and, you know, Bill Spectra sound. I mean, it was all of it evolved and became the music of when we all started in the 70s, and it's still around
Yeah,
us.
yeah.